There comes a time in world history when silence no longer means strength. It means surrender. And today, as we watch the tension rise between Iran and Israel, one question echoes in the hearts of many. Where is India? There's something deeply powerful about a nation that chooses peace over power. In a world that often measures strength by how loud we shout, how many weapons we hold, or how fast we react, there exists a quieter kind of strength, a strength that listens before it speaks, a strength that heals instead of hurts, a strength that is written not just in documents or diplomacy, but in the heart of a people. This is the kind of strength that shaped the soul of a nation long before it ever became a superpower in numbers or economy. A nation that learned to rise through resistance, not with violence, but with values. A place where revolutions were not led by armies, but by voices. Where battles were fought not with hatred, but with hope. Where the greatest leaders didn't raise their fists, they raised their words. From its earliest breath, this country chose a different kind of legacy. It didn't conquer to be remembered. It sacrificed to be free. And in its journey toward independence, it taught the world something rare, that you can fight without hate, that you can resist without revenge, that you can win without war. It became a home for ideas, not ideologies, for cultures, not control, for spiritual courage, not territorial conquest. Its story has always been one of balance, between tradition and transformation, between the East and the West, between progress and peace. While the world turned to missiles and maps to decide who mattered, this nation turned inward, to faith, to family, to forgiveness. And when the world was torn apart by cold wars, hot wars, trade wars, there it stood, still, calm, steady, offering something no headline could capture, a voice that said, we don't need to pick sides to stand for peace, we just need to stand. It never asked to be the loudest in the room, but when it spoke, people listened, not because it demanded respect, but because it lived it. Because behind every diplomatic decision was not just a strategy, but a soul, a belief that peace is not passive. It's powerful. That real leadership doesn't seek conflict, it diffuses it. This country, with all its color, complexity, and contradiction, still found a way to hold it all together. And in doing so, it became more than a democracy. It became a message. That unity doesn't mean uniformity. That dialogue can survive even the deepest divides. That even in a time of division, dignity can still be the loudest voice in the room. So when the world looks for a peacemaker today, it doesn't need a perfect nation. It needs a patient one. One that understands the cause of conflict, not just on soldiers or borders, but on mothers, on children, on generations. One that knows war isn't just a failure of politics, it's a failure of imagination. And that sometimes the most courageous thing a country can do is not to fight, but to forgive. And maybe that's why this nation matters now more than ever. Because the world is tired. Tired of promises that break. Tired of leaders that shout but don't listen. Tired of watching innocent lives become statistics. Tired of being told that war is the only way forward. Maybe the world is finally ready to listen to the quiet again. To the voice that never tried to dominate, but always tried to dialogue. The one that never claimed to have all the answers, but always asked the right questions. The one that, despite being tested by poverty, pain, and politics, still chose progress without losing its peace. That's what makes its history more than history. It makes it a hope. Because what it lived yesterday is what the world is searching for today. Not another power play, but a powerful example. Not a hero, but a healer. A reminder that in the end, the greatest strength isn't found in how many battles we win, but in how many we can prevent, and how many lives we can protect simply by choosing a better way, a way that this nation has known all along. There are moments in our lives when we can no longer pretend that what's happening over there isn't affecting what's happening within us. The Iranian conflict may seem like just another political headline, just another chapter in a long and painful history in the Middle East. But for those who are truly watching, feeling, and listening, it's so much more. It's the sound of children falling asleep to the noise of bombs instead of bedtime stories. It's the silence of parents who don't have answers for why peace seems like a distant dream. It's the fear that grows not just in borders but in hearts. This isn't just a conflict between two nations. It's a wound that, if left untreated, could bleed across continents. We live in a world so deeply connected through technology, through trade, through time zones. But somehow, when war breaks out in a place we've never been to, it still feels distant. We scroll past the images, we shake our heads, we maybe even whisper a prayer. But then we move on because it's not our land, it's not our war, it's not our family. But what if we stop thinking like that? Because conflict, especially one between two powerful nations like Iran and Israel, is never just about two flags. It's about what kind of world we're creating, what kind of future we're allowing, what kind of suffering we're silently accepting, and what kind of peace we're refusing to fight for. Israel and Iran carry with them decades of pain, of distrust, of fear. Each side has its own reasons, its own grief, its own wounds. And when you've carried those wounds for so long, it's hard to see clearly. It's hard to believe the other side wants peace. It's hard to listen when your heart has been trained to defend. But if history has taught us anything, it's that pain never solves pain. Bombs don't heal betrayal. Missiles don't mend mistrust. Retaliation may feel powerful in the moment, but it leaves behind a generation more broken than the one before. We cannot let this become just another cycle that we learn to live with. We cannot let our hearts become numb to the images, the numbers, the names. Every headline that reports a death toll, behind that number is a child, a dream, a home. And while leaders debate strategy and security, ordinary people are paying the price, always. And yet, in all this darkness, there's still a small, quiet hope that maybe the world is ready to stop choosing sides and start choosing peace. That maybe instead of asking who is right, we start asking what is right. That maybe this conflict, this heartbreak, could be the very thing that wakes us up from our apathy and moves us towards something better. Because peace isn't weak. Peace is brave. It takes courage to listen when all you want is revenge. It takes strength to sit across the table from someone you've called your enemy. It takes wisdom to believe that every war can end, not when one side wins, but when both sides choose to stop losing. And this isn't just about governments. This is about us. Every citizen, every viewer, every person with a voice, what we share, what we tolerate, what we allow, these things shape the world we live in. When we stop caring, the world starts crumbling. When we choose silence, violence gets louder. The Iran-Israel conflict is not someone else's responsibility. It's all of ours. Because if we don't speak up for peace, who will? If we don't cry for justice, who will? If we don't hope for healing, then what are we even building? And maybe peace doesn't begin with treaties or talks. Maybe it begins in how we see each other, in how we refuse to let fear define our future, in how we believe stubbornly and sincerely that war is not the final word. This moment is bigger than politics. It's a test of our humanity. Because the true question isn't just whether Iran and Israel will find peace. The question is, will we let them? Will we help them? Or will we watch from a distance as another generation learns to hate? The answer is ours to give. In a world torn between power struggles and political egos, there stands a nation quietly holding something rare. It's not the loudest, not the wealthiest, not the most aggressive, but it carries within it a credibility that wasn't earned overnight. It was built through decades of choices, through patience, resilience, and a constant refusal to become what it was never meant to be, a pawn in global games. While nations rush to pick sides, choose alliances, and flex their military muscles, there exists a different kind of strength. One that doesn't need to shout to be heard. That's the kind of strength we're talking about. The strength that comes from listening first, from being present, even when you're not the center of the conversation, from understanding that leadership isn't about domination, it's about direction. And that is why this nation is needed now more than ever. Because the world is not just looking for influence, it's searching for integrity, for a country that can sit at the table with both Iran and Israel and not be questioned. One that doesn't carry a colonial legacy or a hidden military agenda. One that isn't motivated by oil or ideology, but by something deeper, peace. You see, trust isn't something you can buy. It's not something you can force. It's something you build when you show up not for your benefit, but for theirs. It's built when you can embrace contradiction without compromising on compassion. And this nation has done that. It has maintained deep ties with Iran, rooted in culture, energy, and shared history, and yet it has also nurtured a strong relationship with Israel through technology, defense, and innovation. It's a balancing act that most would collapse under, but not this one. Because this isn't just about foreign policy. This is about human empathy. It's about seeing beyond politics into the people. It's about refusing to define someone only by their past and instead engaging with them based on potential. That's what true diplomacy looks like. Not manipulation, but mediation. Not interference, but invitation. An invitation to come together, not because we agree, but because we care. And now, as tensions rise, as tempers flare, and as the world watches with fear in its eyes, this is the moment where neutrality can no longer mean silence. This is where trust becomes responsibility, because when a nation is trusted by both sides, that's not just a position, it's a purpose. A divine calling to step into the chaos, not to take control, but to bring calm. Not to provoke, but to protect. Not to lead with might, but to lead with meaning. In this volatile moment, where every decision could tip the world closer to war or to healing, we don't need another voice of condemnation. We need a voice of compassion. One that can look at Iran and Israel not with judgment, but with the eyes of a peacemaker. One that can say, we know your pain, we see your fear, but this doesn't have to be your future. And maybe, just maybe, this voice is the one the world didn't realize it was waiting for. Because when you are trusted, your words don't just echo, they land, they matter. And when you carry no agenda except to preserve life, you become something rare in geopolitics. You become believable. It's easy to stand on the sidelines and hope that peace will somehow find its way into the room. But peace needs help. It needs hands. It needs someone bold enough to walk into tension without adding to it. Someone gentle enough to handle history, yet strong enough to carry the weight of now. That kind of nation doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be present. Present with wisdom, present with courage, present with humility. And the world right now is craving that kind of presence. A nation that's not just respected, but remembered for how it responded when the world began to fall apart. Not with weapons, not with judgment, but with trust. Because in times like this, trust isn't just rare, it's revolutionary. There are moments in life when silence feels like wisdom, when saying nothing speaks more than any well-crafted statement ever could. In a world constantly speaking, posting, debating, reacting, silence can be powerful, it can be grace, it can be dignity. But there are also moments, crucial, world-changing moments, when silence becomes dangerous, when holding back doesn't preserve peace, it delays justice. When being quiet doesn't show strength, it reveals fear. When silence doesn't protect anyone, it just helps the noise of violence grow louder. Right now, the world is watching, and in that watching, there are so many nations holding their breath, choosing not to speak, waiting, calculating, hoping maybe things will resolve on their own, that diplomacy will work itself out, that time will fix what truth and courage have not yet confronted. But time doesn't heal what silence refuses to name. And hope cannot replace action when people are dying, when bombs are falling, when children grow up knowing war before they know what peace feels like. There is a line between thoughtful restraint and fearful silence, and that line is being crossed every single day that passes without words, without leadership, without someone standing up, not for power, not for sides, but for peace, is a day that war grows more comfortable, more normal, more accepted. And we forget that silence isn't neutral. In times of suffering, silence becomes a choice, a position, a statement of what you're willing to overlook. And sometimes it's not enough to say we are observing or we are concerned, because concern that leads to nothing changes nothing. There is power in stillness. But stillness must have direction, a purpose. When silence holds space for healing, it becomes sacred. But when silence becomes a shelter for inaction, it slowly turns into permission. And history is filled with those moments. Moments when the world knew something was wrong, but chose silence anyway. We don't need to repeat that history. We live in a time where truth is buried under agendas, and peace is politicized like a weapon. Where speaking out can feel risky, where standing in the middle can feel lonely. But that's exactly why it matters, because the most meaningful stands are often the hardest ones to take. It's easy to speak when the world claps back in approval, but real leadership shows up when applause turns into silence. When everyone else is stepping back and you choose to step forward, not with arrogance, but with assurance, with clarity, with conscience. And sometimes that step forward isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't scream or shame or point fingers. It simply says, enough. Enough violence, enough silence, enough pretending that staying out of it is the same as staying neutral. Because in a world burning with conflict, silence is not a shade of peace. It is a kind of abandonment. It is time for more than just reflection. It is time for responsibility, for nations with voice, with presence, with influence, not to manipulate peace, but to initiate it. To create space where enemies can become neighbors, where war is no longer the only language people believe in. Silence alone will not build that space. It can honor grief, yes. It can show respect, yes. But it cannot heal what action refuses to touch. Words must follow. Action must follow. Because the broken do not need silence. They need solidarity. They need someone to say, we see you, we hear you, and we will not stay silent while you suffer. The need for action is not about rushing in with answers. It's about being willing to stand in the discomfort of truth, to face the complexity of pain, to speak peace not as a political move, but as a moral one. Because in the end, it's not about being right. It's about doing right. There's a time to be still, there's a time to be wise, but there's also a time to rise. And if this moment isn't that time, then when will it be? The world is waiting, not for noise, not for speeches, but for conviction. For someone to say what so many are afraid to say, for someone to remind us that peace isn't passive, it's a choice. And sometimes, the most dangerous sound in the world is silence. There are decisions we make with our minds, and then there are those we must make with our hearts. In the world of politics and diplomacy, it's easy to focus on the strategy, on the calculations, on the postures and well-rehearsed lines spoken in front of flashing cameras. But some moments in history aren't asking for strategy, they're begging for something deeper. A conscience. Because what we're seeing unfold in the world today is not just a political crisis, it's a human one. And no amount of carefully worded statements or balanced negotiations can cover up the pain of lives lost, homes destroyed, futures stolen. We cannot respond to suffering with spreadsheets. We cannot measure broken hearts with charts. This is not just about who controls what land or who started what war. This is about the innocent people in between. The children who don't understand why rockets light up their sky. The families who are caught in the crossfire of history they didn't ask to inherit. And yet, the world keeps responding with tactics, with timelines, with pressure points and power plays. Leaders gather in rooms with long tables discussing how to manage the crisis. But you cannot manage a broken soul. You cannot negotiate a mother's cry or a father's grief. There are moments when the right response isn't found in logic, but in listening. In pausing long enough to let compassion interrupt calculation. In remembering that behind every headline, every statistic, every piece of breaking news, there are names, faces. People who once had dreams. A call to conscience doesn't mean we throw away strategy. It means we don't let strategy bury our humanity. It means we ask the harder questions, not just what's in our best interest, but what is the right thing to do. It means we move beyond what's politically safe into what's morally urgent. Because peace isn't born from convenience, it's born from courage. And courage is never comfortable. It forces us to risk something, to give something, to stand for something, especially when it's easier to stay quiet. We've seen what happens when the world chooses silence. We've lived through the consequences of neutrality dressed up as wisdom. But wisdom isn't always silence. Sometimes it's a voice that rises, even if it shakes. Sometimes it's standing in the middle of opposing forces and saying there has to be another way. And there is. But that way begins when we let conscience lead. Not fear, not self-interest, not alliances based on advantage. When we say we refuse to watch this happen without trying to stop it. When we believe that justice is not a side, it's a stand. The most powerful nations in the world are not the ones with the strongest armies. They're the ones with the clearest conscience. The ones who use their influence not to intimidate, but to intercede. The ones who step in, not because they must, but because they can. The world doesn't need more noise, it needs clarity. It needs leadership that understands the weight of every decision. That knows diplomacy is not just about deals, it's about dignity. It's about preserving life, not just territory. When the dust of war settles and the speeches are forgotten, what people remember is who showed up, who cared, who spoke up when it mattered most, who didn't hide behind politics or borders or distance, but stood in the gap with empathy and resolve. It's not enough to be intelligent. We must also be accountable, not just to our governments or our positions, but to our shared humanity. Because in the end, what defines us is not how well we protected our interests, but how deeply we protected each other. And maybe, just maybe, this moment is not about strategy at all. Maybe it's about soul. About asking ourselves, what kind of world do we want to be part of creating? One where power always wins, or one where conscience never loses? The answer to that question won't be found in a policy briefing. It will be found in our willingness to act not just with our heads, but with our hearts wide open. Because the world doesn't just need another strategy, it needs someone who still knows how to care. Peace isn't a strategy, it's a decision. And right now, the world needs someone to make that decision. Let it be India. Let it be now. Because the world isn't waiting for another war. The world is waiting for a voice that still believes in peace.